Darkness dwells in the hearts of men. Having been forced from their peaceful tribal lands near the Osage River in Missouri, Molly Burkhart and the other members of the Osage Nation would soon come face to face with this disturbing reality. Purchasing a small, isolated reservation on apparently worthless land, where they hoped the government would finally leave them be, the Osage thought they were at last secure.
This is Oklahoma.
However, their seemingly barren land held a hidden secret: black gold. In 1894, one of the largest oil reserves discovered in the U.S. at that time was found beneath the Osage Reservation. The land, once deemed devoid of value, unexpectedly led the Osage to become the richest per capita people on Earth nearly overnight, with a family of 4 taking in nearly $600,000 a year in today's money. The gold mine beneath their feet granted them lavish, upper-class lifestyles beyond imagination. Lifestyles which many grew bitterly jealous and greedy to claim for themselves. Whispers spread like wildfire of the untold fortunes, and soon the Osage began dying off, one by one, under mysterious circumstances. The local authorities claimed natural causes and unknown diseases, but many sensed a deeper malevolence at play, leading the newly fledged FBI to soon take on its first major case. A case which would result in the theft of millions of dollars, uncover a shocking conspiracy, and leave Molly Burkhart utterly alone, with no remaining family and narrowly escaping death herself. The Osage ancestry reaches back thousands of years to early tribes inhabiting the Ohio River Valley. The Osage themselves found their homeland along the Osage River in Missouri, where they thrived as nomadic hunter-gatherers on the Great Plains. With increasing pressure by encroaching European settlers, their peaceful existence was shattered in the 1800s. The Osage were forced under treaty to leave their ancestral river territory. They reluctantly relocated to a reservation in southeastern Kansas in 1825. Though far from ideal, the Osage toiled to build a life there, but it was not to last. Shortly after the conclusion of the Civil War, the Osage were constantly dealing with land theft and encroachment. They decided they had to seek a more peaceful area. This time, the Osage patiently waited for the right deal. They eventually signed yet another treaty, selling their Kansas land for $1.25 an acre. They chose their new plot cautiously, using their previous experiences with greedy settlers as a guide. A tract of rocky, barren land in northeast Oklahoma that white settlers had little use for. Believing the soil not farmable, the Osage hoped they could live there unbothered. Most importantly, as they purchased the land, they managed to retain mineral rights to this apparently worthless place, although unaware of its future value. In 1872, the Osage settled into what they hoped would be their final home, a peaceful, quiet place of their own. But just 22 years later, in 1894, once again their peace would be crushed when the true value of the reservation was shockingly revealed. Enormous oil deposits were discovered beneath the rugged soil. Almost overnight, the Osage went from poverty and subsisting on barren land to living lavish lifestyles most could only dream of. But as news of their fortune spread, so too did the plot of those conspiring to claim the wealth for themselves. As the Osage wealth skyrocketed, local attention turned to jealousy. Their lifestyle grew increasingly lavish, with most families purchasing sprawling homes and multiple cars, something completely unheard of at the time. Word of their fortune made its way to Washington.
Named after a man who never told a lie. Now it's filled with men who seldom tell the truth.
The Osage's new oil riches caused quite a stir in Congress. Lawmakers responded by severely limiting Osage control over their own wealth under the guise of protection. They claimed they just wanted to keep the Osage money safe. Each Osage was now appointed a legal guardian to manage their funds. They lost direct access to their oil royalties and control over their own money. The reservation was also divided into allotments, with individuals receiving land parcels and oil profits. On paper, this granted them ownership, but in reality, it enabled guardians to more easily manipulate the system and their land to eventually be sold. Guardians forced Osage to purchase goods at inflated prices from businesses they owned or partnered with, siphoning money back to themselves. Outright pocketing of cash was rampant as well, resulting in millions stolen over the years. In an attempt to protect their tribe and newfound wealth, the Osage oil rights, called head rights, could not be sold, only inherited. While this seemed like it would keep the rights within the tribe, it rather resulted in schemes of outsiders trying to marry into the tribe and inherit their wealth. Despite this guise of protection, these paternalistic regulations ultimately left the Osage at the mercy of a corrupt system deliberately designed to deprive them of their wealth. A system which Molly Burkhart would soon discover concealed an even darker conspiracy. Molly was jolted awake by a tremendous, thunderous boom. The house shook violently as she jumped out of bed in alarm. Frantically looking out the window, she could see an ominous glow on the horizon. Dazed from her slumber, she turned to her husband, Ernest, asking him what could have possibly happened. He seemed unconcerned at first, telling her to come back to bed, but Molly persisted. That explosion had come from the direction of her sister Rita's home. Pulling Ernest out of bed, she forced him to accompany her to the scene. When they arrived, Molly's worst fears were realized. Rita's house had blown up and was engulfed in flames, and there amongst the wreckage was Rita's body. Her husband Bill had survived the blast but was badly burned, clinging to life but only lasting 4 more days. Molly felt herself reaching a breaking point. This was not the first tragedy to strike her family in recent years. The terror had begun 2 years earlier in May 1921. A local hunter had found Molly's sister Anna's body at the bottom of a ravine after drunkenly leaving a party one night. While first ruled an accident, the bullet hole in Anna's skull told a different story. Unable to solve the murder, Molly tried to carry on, but just 2 months later, her mother mysteriously fell ill and passed away from a wasting sickness. A similar sickness that had taken her sister a few years earlier. Doctors couldn't explain it. And a mere 2 months before Rita's deadly explosion, Molly's cousin, Henry Roan, was shot dead in his car with no explanation. It wasn't just Molly's family who was targeted either. The Osage were seemingly being picked off one by one. With her whole family gone, Molly now possessed her entire family's wealth and also a large target on her back. Local authorities were unable or unwilling to stop the terror.
Criminal investigation requires the employment of many detectives.
Molly and the tribe had no one left to turn to but the U.S. government.
The FBI has the highest entrance requirements of all.
Having exhausted all their other resources, Molly Burkhart and the Osage pleaded to the U.S. government for help stopping the escalating murders. The Bureau of Investigation, recently embroiled in some of the largest scandals in U.S. history, saw a chance to regain some credibility. Newly renamed the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and now under J. Edgar Hoover, they were determined to crack the case. Reviewing the facts, it was clear something sinister lurked below the surface. Previous attempts to investigate by lawyers hired by the tribe resulted in even more mystery. One such lawyer who claimed to have found crucial information on the case was conveniently thrown off a train on his way back to Washington. Another stripped and beaten in an alleyway. This would not deter the Bureau's agents. They decided to focus their efforts on the case they felt was most promising: Henry Roan. While their initial inquiries proved useless, locals had all either been paid off or were too scared to talk, or plain distrustful of the government. The agents persisted regardless. They decided to go undercover as an insurance salesman, cattle buyer, oil prospector, and herbal doctor to turn up any new leads. Though they were deceived and given false leads, the agents' persistence eventually led one local to talk. But the disturbing truth beginning to emerge would prove nearly as shocking to Molly as the murders themselves. In fact, as the FBI prepared to make arrests, Molly was unknowingly being poisoned in her own home. Armed with arrest warrants, FBI agents took local businessman William Hale and Molly's own husband, Ernest Burkhart, into custody. You see, it was Ernest who had talked to undercover FBI agents beforehand, telling them about the local farmhand involved in Henry Roan's murder. The farmhand gave them Hale. William Hale was a local ranch owner known as the King of Osage Hills. He was immensely rich and powerful and was known to have swindled and cheated to get there. He was well known in the community, and being Ernest's own uncle, he attended the very funerals that he was responsible for. The FBI had strategically chosen to pursue Roan's case in particular, as it had occurred on Indian territory and allowed them to file federal charges. Had they chosen another murder outside the territory, they would have been restricted to state court where Hale could manipulate the outcome. With Ernest and Hale detained, the real questioning began. Ernest eventually came clean, implicating his own uncle, Hale, as the mastermind. Hale meticulously planned each assassination in order, allowing the oil head rights to collect under one single person, Molly. Once she was out of the picture, Ernest and Hale would inherit the rights of Molly and her entire family. Ernest gave it all up. He agreed to testify against Hale in court. Hale, on the other hand, was determined to maintain his innocence. As the high-profile trial proceeded, he claimed the FBI tortured false confessions. He aggressively tried to secure his freedom through bribery, lies, and witness intimidation, leading to multiple retrials. He fought them all the way to the Supreme Court, arguing that it had to be a state trial. However, the FBI secured a pivotal Supreme Court ruling which allowed them to remain in the federal system, defeating Hale's last-ditch attempts. Both men, along with a third named in the case, were ultimately convicted by a jury and sentenced to prison to serve the remaining period of their natural lives. The shocking story of greed and violence captured national attention. As the New York Times wrote, "Seldom in the long history of the white man's dubious dealings with the Indian has there been such a determined combination of craft and violence as that described by witnesses before the grand jury." The immense wealth and luxury brought on by the flowing oil on their lands ended up costing the Osage much more than money. Molly herself finally saw some semblance of justice, but her pain and trauma remained. She eventually recovered from the poison and was able to move on with her life. She raised her children and lived relatively quietly until passing in 1937 at just 50 years old. As for those found guilty, her husband Ernest was paroled after only 11 years in 1937, the same year Molly died. He immediately robbed a bank before returning to prison in 1959. Hale served 21 years before being paroled in 1947, never showing remorse for his actions. Today, while 75% of the head rights remain in Osage hands, the oil accounts for less income than casino revenue. In fact, the Osage seem ready to leave the oil stains of the past behind. In 2015, the tribe launched a large-scale wind farm, opening the door to new forms of income and a greener future. The dark days that befell the Osage Nation will not be forgotten, but neither will the resilience of their spirit and determination.